Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. I see some familiar faces. It's been a great honor to be asked to come back and speak again with you all. And I guess I should say thank you for choosing to be here versus being at Coachella. And I'm here. And I'm really grateful that I'm not up against Beyonce. So I don't have any, Destiny's reunions in my presentation today. So hopefully you all got to catch some of the presentations this afternoon in live and get to enjoy your Saturday afternoon here with us. So I want to start off with talking a little bit about, why I've been asked to speak. And for those of you who may not have seen me speak before, I wanted to let you all know a little bit about myself. So as David mentioned, I am the Director of Academic and Research Programs for the Academic Advancement Program here on campus. I myself have been in your shoes. I was an undergrad student here at UCLA specifically. I know not all of you are, hopefully you will be here, and some of you are, I think. So I wrote plenty of research proposals, both as an undergrad student who was also first gen and hustling to make ends meet and to pay for my schooling. I found my passion in research, and so I learned, wow, like you can get paid to do research, why not? So then from there, just developed, opportunities or tried to network to find different ways that I could do research and get paid for it, since it was something that I learned through my coursework, actually, first and foremost, that I enjoyed doing research. And then from there, I've stayed actually here for my PhD in education. And so definitely during my graduate career, we were expected to, as a part of your graduate experience, write research proposals specifically for both my master's thesis and then later my dissertation. And then after that, I was a postdoc. We also had to write for funding for many research programs and projects while I was a postdoc with the Center for Educational Assessment here on campus. So we always needed money for staffing or for research and evaluation of the various programs across campus here. Last but certainly not least, I now know what it's like to be on both sides. So I, as a director now, certainly get the opportunity to see amazing work come from our students here at UCLA and actually beyond. So I've been asked to review for conference proposals, journals, as well as different undergraduate research scholarships on campus, some that have a research requirement or component. And so that piece of it, I've been able to really get to know undergraduate students and their ideas when it comes to research and things that they're truly passionate about and would like to study here, in the programs that they're applying for. So that being said, hopefully you will view some of my advice as from somebody who's been on the other side, sitting on review committees or being asked to review these proposals. And so with that said, I want to say that hopefully today it's not just about how do you write a research proposal, but hopefully I can give you something that you didn't know already about research proposals, and also how do you write the strongest research proposal possible. I understand that some of you have already had this experience of having had to write a research proposal. Maybe you already researched what it was to write one before you had to write it. Maybe you tried to figure it out from the application, what you needed to include in the research proposal. Or maybe since then you've learned a lot about research from all the different Saturday Academies that you've attended thus far this year. So I know that when I think back to research proposals that I've written, there's always something that I've learned later on that I was like, oh, if only I could go back and do that different, I wouldn't have done X, or I would have done this instead, right? So that being said, hopefully again today you have some takeaways as well, even though you've had some experience already. So what is a research proposal? So I actually just, put it into Google. You can research anything. I want to say that right now, right? And you all probably have learned that through the Saturday Academy and through this program. You can research anything under the sun. So I was like, well, I'm curious, what are different definitions of research proposals? And so oftentimes what makes a good research proposal is having a good understanding of, what is it? Or are you speaking the same language as the person's asking you to write the research proposal. Because if those two things line up, then you're probably giving them what they want, right? And so therefore your research proposal is probably going to be considered stronger. So that being said, if you take a look, I gathered some different definitions. So specifically when I talk about research proposals with the various research programs that I work with, we describe it to students as basically a statement that describes for us, what do you intend to study? What do you want to know more about? What do you want to really carry out a research project, and give us some details about that project so we know not only what you want to study, but how you're potentially going to study it, okay? And also, why should you be studying that? Okay. Oftentimes people forget that part, but it's actually very, very significant, that last part, the idea, why is it important to your specific field of study? Why should you be doing this research? And so that is a key part in a lot of research statements and research proposals. The UCLA library puts out actually a guide on how to write or what is a research proposal. And so they say that it's to convey the details of an intended project also. And more specifically, they give a little bit more of an outline of some of the things that they think are content that should be included. So certainly, what's the topic, goals, anticipated results or outcomes that you may have from your project, theory or framework guiding the research, and how are you going to carry it out, and what are the costs associated with it, and why is the research project needed, and last but not least also, what do you bring to the table? When studying this project, why should you be the qualified person to do this research? Why not, your peer next to you? Why not faculty members? Why not other graduate students, other undergraduate students? Why you specifically? And USC also has a library guide. So along the way, I'm hopefully also giving you some references so that you can start to think about, well, what resources exist out there around how to write research proposals. So USC library puts out a guide that says, the goal of the proposal is to present and justify the need to study a research problem. So, you want to present the practical ways in which the proposed study should be conducted as well in your research proposal. I find these to be similar in nature, and obviously, depending on the perspective of the program that you're applying for the funding from, or who's asking you to write it, they might emphasize different aspects of these different components. So we're going to talk about all these different components today, and I want to make sure that I point out some caveats along the way, because some of these do vary by field, some of these do vary by the discipline that you're going into, or specific program criteria and what they may be looking for that you want to address and bring into your research proposal, even though it may not be a part of the common definitions around what is a research proposal. Continuing along, I'll tell you that research proposals vary quite a bit in length. So I've seen proposals that are under a page where you only have, let's say, 500 words to entire chapters. Okay. So the length sometimes corresponds with what it is that you're actually writing the proposal for. So sometimes I mentioned to you all that I was a student here and I was a graduate student. I certainly had to write research proposals as a part of my degree requirement for getting my doctorate here at UCLA. So I had to write a dissertation proposal, which is a research proposal. Definitely that was many chapters and much longer than a page, and took a number of years. So keeping that in mind, the length might vary by these different purposes of the proposal, or what it is that you're maybe submitting these proposals for. Another research proposal that you might have to submit is to the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB. Here on this campus, they're known as the Office of Human Protection and Research Subjects Board. And there's a board that reviews research proposals if you're going to be interacting with other humans, There's also a board that reviews it if you're using animals in your research study, for those of you potentially doing lab work in the sciences and working with animals. There's a North Campus review board here on this campus versus a South Campus one. So if you're doing more social sciences, behavioral studies, versus if you're doing more clinical, medical treatments, that might be more the South Campus board. In those proposals, they're gonna look very different. They're gonna have specific criteria for you, that questions that you'll need to answer. So oftentimes you're answering their direct questions in the form of an IRB application, and then touching on that. So I don't know if you've had any presentations thus far about IRB, but that's something to keep in mind, that might be another entity that will ask you in the future potentially to write a research proposal or to share your proposal with them, so that they know what is the nature of the work that you're doing, how will you be doing this research, so that they can make sure that it's ethical, moral, okay? And then certainly for funding, right? You need to write research proposals to really get that money to carry out your work, to carry out that very important work that hasn't yet been done, hopefully. And we're gonna talk to that point in just a minute, that hasn't been done before, okay? I've been asked today to focus on undergraduate research programs and research proposals for undergraduate research programs. And oftentimes those programs do come with funding, whether it be a scholarship that directly goes towards you and your financial aid while being a student, or you could choose to use that money to directly fund your research, meaning things that you will need to do or buy, or items that you will enact on within your project where you need extra funding to do that. Those are costs that typically financial aid don't factor into your student budget, right? You're going above and beyond as a student researcher. You're taking on an additional research project, and not every student has to, but as a research scholar, you're going to be doing that. So you may have additional costs that you're gonna have to cover. So how are you gonna do that? So hopefully the stipends or the scholarships and fellowships help you pay for that. So I said already, we're gonna focus on undergraduate research programs. So in this case, we're gonna talk about that being the audience, but definitely know your audience. So even undergraduate research programs can vary quite a bit in terms of what it is that they may be seeking, what's the goal and mission of their specific program. I direct the McNair Research Scholars Program on campus. Up until this year, we were only working with humanities, arts, and social science projects and students. So if you were a science student and you didn't know and you submitted a research proposal to us, we would not previously, again to this year, have funded that project. It could have been a great, really strong, convincing proposal, but because that wasn't the mission or the goal behind our program, we wouldn't have necessarily provided you with funding for that proposal, right? So definitely know your audience. The other way is, okay, you read the mission, the things on the website, what it is that they're looking for, but also try to find out more. A lot of folks don't know to just ask. I'm wondering, I'm applying for this program. I'm wondering if you could share with me maybe what you're looking for in an ideal candidate to the program, or to be funded for this, call for proposals, right? So you need to ask those questions if you can, and don't be afraid to ask those questions. They're benign. The most they could say is, sorry, we're not allowed to share, or, oh, no, we're not certain yet, right? But at least you've tried to ask. You may even want to ask who's reading it. That is your most direct audience, is who is going to be reading that proposal, okay? So if somebody were to ask me, I would tell them that we have faculty reviewing. We try to have our faculty advisory committee reviews the applications for us. We have faculty who volunteer who have maybe previously had McNair Scholars before, so they know our program and would like to help support, so they have offered to volunteer their time to review proposals. So also try to find out who it is who's reviewing your proposal. Definitely go with the guidelines that they ask. So you saw how the earlier definitions of what is a research proposal varied quite a bit, right? So in some research proposal guidelines, they will tell you exactly the questions that they want you to answer bit for bit. And if you don't pay attention close enough, where you're like, oh yeah, those are all the common things in a research proposal, and there's one thing in there that might be specific to their application compared to most others, and you miss that, right? You're gonna definitely set yourself apart, and not so much in a good way. So make sure I always like to start drafting and then go back to that original application and use that as kind of like a checklist. And did I answer all the questions that they were asking? Even though they write it in a big long paragraph, or sometimes those instructions are like pages, right? Going through that page, making sure that in a very deep, in a middle paragraph somewhere, right, has got to be what it is that they're looking for, what they want you to talk about in that statement or proposal. So please make sure you go back and read that line for line and just ask yourself, did I answer those questions? Did I touch on these things? Right? Talk about format. So this is probably one of the most common, but that's my caveat here, is this is most common, but it is probably not everyone, okay? So there might be exceptions to this format. So please make sure, again, you go back and check the specific instructions. But for now, I'm gonna proceed with these sections as giving you an idea of the format behind research proposals, because oftentimes, even in the questions that they ask you to write about, if they're giving you prompts or specific questions, they're sometimes just asking you questions about these very sections that I'm gonna outline for you all today. So you can think about the sections here in a unique way. So we have the introduction, so you're really introducing your project there. Your literature review, research questions, methodology, timeline and budget, and then the justifications or the significance and implications of your work as to that why question, like why are you doing this research, right? And certainly last but not least, always not forgetting to include your references. What is your whole proposal based off, right? Is probably other people's work, so make sure that you cite and include references. I have this diagram here to kind of help students that I work with around research proposals to kind of get them to see how they can think about approaching their draft or their outline. So I like to think about this as like an hourglass, or like think about it as a funnel too. The idea is that when you start your proposal, you want to be as broad or general as possible. Okay, so the introduction is going to be that. It's going to be more general, broad, history, background, leading up to your project. It's going to get a little bit more specific when you get to the lit review, because you're not going to go read anything and everything. You're going to read specifically to your topic, right? Or your project. So you want to make sure to kind of start to hone your lit review. And then research questions. So I'm going to get to what each section is, but I wanted you to keep this framework in mind as we talk through the different sections. So you can see the most specific that you need to be is going to be with your research questions. So great, you're submitting this research proposal. They want to know what your research questions are. What are you going to be studying? What are you going to be answering, right? Those questions need to be very, very specific. Certainly your methods, how you're going to do your project, how you're going to carry out your project is also going to be extremely specific. It should be, right? It's your project. No one else should be able to do those same things in exactly the order in which you want to do them, right? So think about it in that way and being specific. I'll take questions too, so if there's any, feel free to interrupt me, okay, as we go. And then we come back to being broad and compelling. So why should we do this project? What are you hoping to find? What's it going to do for us? And let's get there with what potentially are the future implications of your work and why it should be supported. And ending with references. Yes?
This might be skipping ahead a little, but when it comes to like methods and timeline, I've noticed that in the practice of doing my project, like I've sort of had to change or redo who I'm targeting as an audience for my research and that kind of stuff. Like, how flexible is it after you like enter the proposal?
So I just received a question about Well, I'm asking you to get very specific here. And you do, and you submit your proposal. And I think the question was, if you submit a proposal and then you find yourself having to go back and tweak either your questions or tweak your methodology and how you're gonna carry out this work, let's say because your advisor suggested something else, or you read another article and it says X, Y, or Z, or you came across a new researcher, right? So I'm gonna get to that. But absolutely, think about these things as being fluid. Okay. You're submitting a proposal, and at that moment, that's what you intend to do, right? But at any given time, that may change, and it's relevant change, right? You're not changing it just because you woke up the next day and changed your mind, and that is probably backed by some rationale or reason as to why you want that change, right? So usually the funding agency or the program or whatever your audience, you're writing to, right, understands that. It's just that how they may require you to make those changes might be different. So what I mean by that is some might ask you to submit those changes in writing. So you're gonna go ahead and revise your proposal, right? Others may say, well, that's not completely our scope and what we intended to fund you for. And so they may make a decision to go back on their funding. But I think that if you have a strong enough proposal to begin with, and you're not completely bailing ship on the topic or the project, they're usually likely to work with you on that. It's your project, and as you conduct your research along the way, certainly it's gonna change and take shape differently or alter courses. And I think sometimes the degree to which that change is, or how big of a change are you making versus how small, it may or may not even matter to the agency. And so you could always just check with them. So good question. So if we think about now getting into this, what does an introduction look like? What should go in there? I say the history, the background. So this is where you want to start making connections for people as to how you came to the study, why is this an important hot topic right now, what's the context around your project, right? So somebody who might be studying something that's a hot topic right now can bring in news articles, can bring in news headlines that say like, oh, well, right now, there are several movements across the country politically that are relevant to my project, right? And naming some of those and why this work is going to be important to look at, or how you're coming to framing your work now and why you want to do this research project. Then in your proposal, how you came to doing this work, and now what it is that you're going to be doing in your project should come from some basis, right? That, very importantly, is going to be your literature review. So what has already been done about this issue or topic that you want to research? And what's still out there that needs to get answered? Conduct a substantive review of literature. So oftentimes students think like, oh, I know what a lit review is. Okay, I read a bunch of articles, I summarize them, I talk about them, I analyze them, and that's my lit review.
Wrong.
Is that a question?
No. I think it's wrong, right? It's just too simplistic.
Right, is that too simplistic? Yes,
I have a question for the literature review. How do you best suggest to make the transition? When you're going from one literature to another, how do you make that transition, like that transitional phrase, to kind of, make the articles go in hand with each other? Because right now, that's where I'm kind of struggling, and I'm just like, how do I have everything, but it's just like the transitioning part is where I'm having trouble.
That's a great question. I think my next slide might get at that, so if you don't mind saving your question. Her question was around how do you transition between potential different bodies of literature or different articles that you're reading if you're going to be incorporating them into your lit review. So I'm going to talk about that in on the next slide,
Okay, thank you.
hopefully. Okay. So when you think about your lit review, also students make the mistake where everything that I've read has to be in my lit review. Is that true?
No.
That's way too much, right? You should be reading very broadly, okay? And then you should find those ones that are most related to your work that you're gonna start to say, well, oh yeah, that one makes an argument for why my study, or that one's connected to my work because of X. And I'm starting to answer your question already, okay? So those what you're summarizing or what you're analyzing in your lit review has to come back to, is it related to my topic? Is it related to my questions? Is it related to this project? And if it's not, and it's something you read, it's great for like maybe something in the introduction or what, like, you know, kind of overall context. That's not necessarily something that you're gonna have to break down in your lit review. Okay? So please make sure you're discerning about your readings and what you include in the lit review. So that's why it's a substantive review where you're like really thorough, but then you also have to make sure that you're discussing specifically previous work that has a connection to yours, right? So I told you all that I researched this. I researched how to do a research proposal. So it turned out that in the NIH, National Institute for Health, there was a research article published in one of their journals that actually was about how do you write a literature review? There we go, that was what we're getting to right now. But how do you write a research proposal, right? And so somebody had done essentially a research project where they wanted to know that. And so they literally went in like a Google Scholar and, you know, article databases and used keywords like research proposal. What was the other terms that they used? I'm trying to remember now all of the different ones, but it was just so incredibly novel. And I was like, wow, like, and they got all these different hits of different articles that talked about research proposals and what they were, and guidelines, and guidelines was another keyword they use, and things like that, got research guidelines, you know? And so they summarized it, like, and wrote an entire article based off of a lot of different other projects that were about how to write research proposals. So I have that linked for you all at the end in the references here. But I really liked one summary that they made was the 5 C's while writing a literature review. And I had not seen this summarized quite so concisely in anything else in terms of a resource guideline that I've come across in the past as this one. So I was thinking, oh, like, how am I gonna paraphrase this? And I was like, no, this needs to speak for itself. So I just included it here directly for you all. So this is directly from that article. So these are kind of critical components when you're talking about writing a research proposal and how it is that you set up your lit review. So I would say when you talk about how do you transition from one paragraph to the next, or one idea or thought that's related to your one project and then another, is to use some of these techniques. So is it that you're comparing and contrasting, so then you can switch your transitional sentence to be like, well, you know, all the previous research has been in support of this, but there's also a whole body of literature that actually is against that, right? That's one way of transitioning. Let's see, so contrasting, I guess, would be like that, like what's in disagreement, like are there arguments there? And so, okay, you know, these and these authors all suggest this, but you know, there's equally many scholars on the other side of that same coin that say X, right? But on top of all that, no one has studied Y. And aha, here's where I insert my connection. The last C is, how is my work now connected to this work that has already been done or has been published, right? And you can do the lit review in any one of these ways, and it's not like one or the other, but in fact should be kind of a combination of these things. Okay. So you can choose that your study is going to be a critique, you know, potentially of other arguments. You're also going to be in the literature review critiquing each other's work, you know, meaning the scholars who are doing the different, let's say if they're opposing bodies of work, right? You can also critique what are the limitations. Okay? and bring that up as valid points as to then why your project is important, right? Again, in the proposal, you're still trying to sell your project, right? Make it compelling. So you gotta say, well, I've done a lit review and this is what exists. If you do your lit review and your questions are already answered, the committee is gonna be like, well, why then are they looking at the exact same thing? Right? So find those holes, those gaps. Talk about what's different in your work. Or if it's just validating something that has already been done, what are you adding on top of that? So this I thought was a resource that I wanted to pass on to you all as something we don't think about. At least I know as an undergrad student, when I wrote lit reviews, it wasn't something that I necessarily thought about these different ways of being able to talk about what already is out there in terms of research when I was doing a lit review. Research question. Really detail out what you're answering. So don't be afraid here to make it a multiple part research question. You can have your big overarching question, and then part A looks at this and part B looks at that. Or part C or part D. You know, dissertations have, I had 3 research questions in my dissertation, and each one of those had 3 subparts. So it was like 9 questions, if you will, overall, right? So don't be afraid to have subparts where you're breaking apart your research question, but please, please, please be specific. Your questions are not about your overall topic or your interest. It's the very question that through your methods, which we're gonna talk about next, as to how you're gonna answer those questions, should be answering those questions. So please make sure that you be as specific as possible. And at the end of this, we're gonna talk a little bit potentially about, if I have some time, to show you some samples of research projects, okay? Methodology. So if you haven't taken any research methods courses and you don't know what methodology is, really fancy way of saying how you're going to do this work. So, you know, a lot of times students are most confused about this section because they're like, I don't know how I'm supposed to talk about it. And oftentimes I just tell them, like, tell me exactly what you plan on doing first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, until you're done with this project. So really going through and saying, you know, I want to look at this by interviewing 10 people. I'm gonna have gender balance because I want to make sure it's not one gender over another. I'm also gonna let individuals self-define their gender, right? Or on the gender spectrum, right? So detail those things out. Make sure that the reviewers know how you're gonna do this work. What types of questions are you gonna be asking? How are you gonna ask them? Interviews, focus groups, surveys. In a proposal, depending on the length, this gets real tricky. Because I'm telling you to try to be as detailed as possible, but that means more words, more pages, more, however much you're gonna go over that limit that they may put on you, right? In terms of writing a research proposal. So think here in methodology also being strategic in terms of giving a couple of examples that are specific and then moving on, and not like, you know, keep detailing everything so thoroughly, but in fact give a couple of example questions that you may ask in the interviews and then move on, so that you can say, well, I'm going to ask about their family history. Here's one example where family history includes X, Y, and Z, and then move on to the next thing. One thing that I think is a trick is sometimes it's not explicitly stated to include in the methodology a timeline or budget of your project. For me, when I get a proposal to review where the instructions don't say to do that, but the student has, I think bonus points. Like, yes, they know exactly what they're gonna do, when they're gonna do it, and it shows me, and they've thought through how much this is gonna cost, what it's actually gonna take. They're not just telling me, they're like showing me, right? And so that showing part, and showing up by, adding on a couple of things, even if they're not asking for it, if you have the room. Now, again, if you have the room, okay, in your page limits, and how you do that again strategically. So sometimes a table takes up less room than writing it out in a paragraph, right? So I'm gonna show you all just a real simple sample of a research timeline. You're up against a page limit crunch or something, and guess what? When you put this in a table, or the budget, which is up next in a table, you can make that font way smaller than 12-point font because it's not text in the body. Just an example. Now, of course, follow their rules and guidelines. If they say absolutely not, all texts have to be, and it does get that specific. So I will mention to y'all, like, I'm also the PI on the National McNair Grant, which is a U.S. Department of Education federal grant. When we wrote the grant proposal for that one, it was specific. If you were a single word or a character over 60 pages, your application was thrown out. It wasn't even read. Tables and charts had to be double spaced, even though that's not typically the standard APA style, in which case that's what I was using, okay, in terms of formatting style. And, the font all had to be the same size, so please do make sure you double check like the requirements and if it's okay, etc. But I would hate for you to be disqualified based on something like that. But most of the time, these are kind of some things around it. So research timeline, it's like, well, how detailed do I get? How specific? You know what? Just this is fine. If you're on quarter system, if you're on a semester system, whatever that may look like, outline a couple of months. Don't go down to the day, okay? That's, of course, your methods might change, like somebody, brought up in a great question earlier. This is kind of a rough estimate as to like what you're hoping for. If all went well, ideally, this is what would be happening. Okay, now budget. You're asking them for money, oftentimes in a research proposal. Tell them how you're going to use it. And sometimes people get scared. How do you do a budget? What do you mean? Like, how do I talk about that? Right? Certainly you can tell them, I'm going to spend X amount on this, Y amount on that, and maybe you should describe it. On top of that, include something like this. It doesn't have to be fancier than this. Simply, what is it and how much is it going to cost? And tell them, this money that you're giving me is really going to help with this, right? So people don't think about it, but to do research, it's expensive. It can get really, really expensive. Okay? You have to think about a lot of things. I'm going to do interviews. Are you going to sit there and write out everything possible that somebody says to you in an interview, right? You're going to probably need a digital recorder. From there, I didn't even include it on here, but are you going to transcribe all those interviews that you've now recorded? Are you going to get help and hire somebody to help you transcribe? Those are all costs, right? So like I said, research can get expensive. Now I have to analyze that data. There's software out there that helps you code or analyze for themes and looks for that in, let's say, a transcript of an interview. So you're not doing that labor-intensive work. You can to save money, but there's expensive software like Atlas TI and others that can help you with coding and analysis. So that all costs money. If you're going to do qualitative work versus quantitative work, if you need to do large surveys, right? Are you going to use SurveyMonkey? SurveyMonkey will cost you money, right? You need to sign up for an account If it's just the free one, it doesn't get you very far. You know, they limit you in terms of number of questions, etc., and all that. So those are different costs. Are you going to pay your participants to do your study? So you think your research is really, really important, of course, right? And you know why it's so important. Next, you got to convince those potentially that you're studying that it's important, right? On top of who's funding your work, that this is important. So if you're going to pay participants incentive, you know, you may want to tell them that too, so that they know that this money isn't necessarily just coming to you, it's also going to then be. And sometimes that's allowed and sometimes it's not allowed. So you maybe want to check with the program, but that's something that I want to raise. So just to, you know, and then I didn't fill in others, but you could always add more and do subtotals too if it gets to be a lot. But here, you know, just total up the amount in the column and that's it. So this can be done in Excel or it could just be like a table in Microsoft Word. Implications, why is this research needed, significance, what are the broader implications, so what, right? Beyond this study, once you do it, what are you hoping to find, and then where does it go from there? What are the implications? Once you think you're gonna find this, what could it potentially have the power to do for people or for things, right? So include that. But also make sure you include for the field what's important or why is this work important. So you started with the lit review, which is likely all the previous research that has already been done in certain fields or one specific field, depending on your work, if it's interdisciplinary or not, right? You want to kind of also take your audience back there as well, okay? So you bring back oftentimes your lit review and your intro at the end of a research paper, or in this case, your research proposal too, right? You're reminding them again, oh yeah, how did this all start? And this is why now, if I do this project, it's gonna potentially, right now, solve all these great things that I first showed you, that there's gaps in this research, or that there's, you know, this detail missing in the field, or, you know, this is going on in society today, and so the faster we figure this out, the better, right? Whatever that may look like. And then references, and then again, please make sure that you have a formatting style when it comes to research, whether that be in your field, if it's MLA, APA. APA is the American Psychological Association. A lot of the social sciences prefer APA style citations and references and how you write a research proposal or guidelines. That will all show the reviewers of a program or an application or the faculty member that you know what you're doing because you have researched this. You're showing off the research skills that you already have, right? So please make sure that your references are consistent. Whichever one you pick, stick with it throughout the whole proposal. So keeping this in mind. Did you guys see as I was going through talking about each section more in detail how it got more narrow and then how it gets broadened back up again? How are you gonna get support for writing your proposal and putting it together? Definitely start with your faculty advisor, because they're already going to know, right, that area of study. There's a reason why you're working with them potentially on this research project that you're proposing, right? So use their knowledge. Let them guide you. Let them tell you, like, you know, things that you should definitely include, things that you should avoid including, right? Graduate students in your field can help potentially. Just so you all know, as an office, I have graduate students who work in my office from a variety of fields who will sit down and actually look over people's research proposals or actually give like this very talk and show undergrads how and what goes into a research proposal. So definitely graduate students have to do it, right? I told you all, like, especially doctoral students, like they would have to propose their dissertation at the very least, so they will definitely know what a research proposal section should be, what should go in it, all that. And if they're in your field, they can also help with suggestions for your lit review, right? Like, oh, you know, have you read this piece or this scholar or that scholar? That is actually the most useful and helpful. So your advisor, your faculty advisor might be doing that already, just putting a lot of reading on you, right? There's a reason for that, right? So they want you to have all this backdrop so that you can show the best your best foot forward with your own ideas when it comes to proposing your own work. Librarians are underutilized. They are so critical and they can help so much, but people don't just, you might go to the library to study, you might go to the library if you're looking for one specific thing already, and never even talk to the librarian who's sitting there. And a lot of colleges and universities, the librarians can even specialize in a particular field or area. So I remember as an undergrad, I was like, I have to write a paper on this, and I went and just asked the librarian, and she's like, here, read this, here's how you find this, here. She was doing the work for me. You know, honestly, like, I could have sat at home trying to Google stuff, you know, figure it out, and I went and sat with her for like an hour. I left with over 10 sources that I went home and read and included in my paper, like from those 10 sources. You know, and that was for a research paper. So imagine what she could do for a whole research proposal, or he could do for a whole research proposal, or they could do, right? So please make sure, like, utilize these librarians. Honestly, they just sit there and they tell me all the time now, like, you know, because I work with undergraduate scholars, right? And they're like, can you send them our way? Like, we would love to help them, but they kind of come here just to study, or, you know, they come for a computer lab, you know, computer labs that are there, or check out a laptop, and that's it. So I send my students there. So actually here on campus, they're really nice. I think, you know, they help general public as well. Like if folks in the community come to the campus and, you know, want to look at a source or something, they'll try to guide you as best they can too. They're not kind of discerning like, oh, you're not a student here, so therefore I don't help you, right? They don't ask those kinds of questions. And research guides. So I mentioned to you all that I pulled some stuff from the research guides when I started this presentation. And so definitely check out their different research guides. Here on this campus, there's some. I pulled USC's. So many colleges and universities like across the country have these different kinds of guides. So please look into those. And then from a writing perspective, make sure that you are going to writing centers that might help you with reviewing, editing. They might also have guidelines to help you write a research proposal. This slide is like that extra, I hope. Don't be afraid to ask. So for my research program, students oftentimes don't know because they don't ask, but when we try to do info sessions and we try to outreach so that they know, we will sit down with you. We will look over your proposal before you submit it officially to apply for the program. We actually encourage that. I understand that that's not always the case, but you know what? It doesn't hurt to ask. So the program staff might be willing or able to help you if you would like some guidance with your proposal, whether it be a very specific question about formatting, or if it's okay to include a table or a graph or whatnot, to things that might be more broad, right? And when I say more broad, you can ask them potentially to even review it and give you feedback if they're comfortable or know your area or field. But even if not, ask them for samples. Do you have, you know, samples or sometimes they don't know, like, what do you mean samples? Well, ask them. Last year or previous years, you guys have funded however many projects. Do you happen to have their proposals? Are those public? You know, would I be able to get a copy of them? And what you'll find is sometimes on their websites, they've actually listed like previous year scholars. And then there is their proposal. So you could actually see what their project is and what they're doing right now. And they were successful at getting that funding, right? So please make sure you also check with the programs directly, because oftentimes they will list already those ones that have been successful and those ones that are currently being funded by that group or organization or those who are participating in the program. Okay. There's no substitute for seeing a sample one. Many drafts. Get anyone and everyone who will be willing to sit down and read that thing to read it, because you don't know the committee, right? Potentially who's on there. And so it could be your peers who, like current program participants, to graduate students, to faculty readers. So you want as many folks who will sit down and give you their time to read this and tell you also from their perspective what might be missing, or hey, this is clear, this is not clear. That leads me to the review committee. So I talked a little bit about this and alluded to who might be on the committee, and you can always ask. But these are any and all of the potential ones that I can think of, and there's probably even more than this. Program staff, current participants, graduate students, postdocs, faculty can all potentially be on the review committee. Okay. Yes,
Can you talk about how it works? Say if you have a lot of applications, how do you, everybody gets coffee or like?
Great question. So this is the first and foremost, typically within the same field of study. So usually what they want to do is somebody who's going to know the area or the field to be able to judge your work or your ideas around what is already existing, or what is a new idea or not a new idea, those kinds of things, right? So they're going to look to people who are going to be more aligned with your work and be potentially in your related field. And then you mentioned the question of volume. So like what happens if there's many, how do they read it? I'll share all that with you in just a second. So review criteria. We get the applications. We will try to send the applications to those who are closest in area or match to yours. They'll be sent a review sheet. The review sheet has to be standard, meaning that everyone who's reviewing a proposal will review with the same sheet in front of them. And these are what we ask them to look for. And this is a composite, I should say, of ones that I have reviewed for, as well as my own programs, just so you know. So I try to pool all the different review rating sheets together. And these were kind of all the different criteria that I saw either in all of them or in some of them and not in others. So I just kind of compiled them all for you here. Okay. So clarity, how clear is your project and paper or your proposal? How well written it is, right? Are you demonstrating knowledge of that topic? So that really is your lit review. Like, are you showing that you've been well read, that you have read and know what exists and what doesn't exist in the field and have that knowledge about that area or that topic, right? So really demonstrating that, and demonstrating that really comes through in your lit review, I think, the most. Of course the whole thing, but probably most in your lit review. Is it compelling and significant? And then, are you using the right methods? Does this line up with your field or area of study as to what people typically do to answer these kinds of questions or not? And feasibility. I have to tell you that, we get really grand projects and we're only a 1 year long program or a 2 year long program, and it's like, that's a great project, but that's like a dissertation, or that's like what faculty do in a lifetime, right? So really the feasibility, how feasible is it that you're actually going to be able to complete this work and answer your set of questions? That's why you also have to be very specific with your questions and specific with your methods, so that it's actually something that they can see tangibly happening with you. Okay. Comments, in addition to rating Likert scale wise, we're able to open comment on them, so that when the committee gets together, if somebody's missing, we have all of their comments and we pull their comments. And then overall rating as well of the proposal as a whole. And then sometimes, depending on how many there are, we do ask them potentially to rank applicants within one field. So out of the ones that you read, could you please also rank 1 through 5 in order, strongest to least strongest. But I want to make clear that this review criteria is about the proposal. But a lot of times when you're applying for research programs, you all have heard from one of the previous, one of my colleagues across campus, who's the director of the Undergraduate Research Center. The programs, oftentimes there's multiple components to your application, right? You still have your personal statement as well, potentially. You have letters of recommendation from faculty. There's multiple pieces. So while this is criteria kind of on your research proposal, that's not necessarily what the whole decision as to whether you're going to be in the program or not is made from, right? It's only one piece potentially of your whole application. So always keep that in mind too. So I think I answered your question about how we read, and then we pull them back, and then depending on the next steps, so sometimes like in my case, we always do interviews next from these. And so that's also when, if there's open comments, we will ask those comments or concerns during those interviews face to face. And I know that this afternoon, after me, you'll have a session on how to approach interviews for research programs potentially. So go get that funding. That money is out there. If it's not one foundation or another, or organization or a program, there's so many out there. So apply, and go get that money. You'll have the references. I believe this will be posted online, so you don't have to worry about jotting this down so frequently, frantically. Questions at large?
Question. So, just going over what you have explained for the research. So basically, when you were doing your research, you look for the interesting the topics you want to focus on, and based on your findings, you're gonna go ahead and either cite them or paraphrase them basically, and then you're gonna talk about like why you were bringing this topic, like what is like more to it, like why you were talking about this, and then you're also gonna say that this is what you want to do, and is it supposed to be this following that order, right?
Yeah. So the question was, does kind of bringing in other work fall in the order of where you kind of summarize what they did,
Right.
how they did it, what they found, and then how what you find to be an issue with it or potential, how it's related to your work, and then bring in what you're then going to do about it, right?
Okay.
Is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm repeating the question for everyone to hear too. That is true. That is very true in part. So you're going to be looking at what already exists, what has been done out there, and then only bringing what's relevant or related. So sometimes I read a lot of proposals where they will summarize for me all the other studies in their lit review. This is what they did, this is how they did it, this is what they found. In actuality, in a lit review, what you really need is what they found, and then bringing in what or how they did it or those other things only if you're planning to address that with your work or research. So sometimes it's okay to just in a lit review say what they found, and oh, these people found this with this, and then these people found that with that. Here I'm really going to be doing a study on this so that we can kind of like see, well, which is it, right? But I didn't necessarily have to bring in how they did what they did unless I was going to be also adding something to that piece. So if I brought in, for example, well, so far all the work on, I'm going to put this out there, like critical race theory has been done in qualitative fashion. And let's say I'm a quantitative researcher. For some reason, I, want to stick to that method and I want to examine it. So I'm going to say, like, give a lot of different examples of how methodology works in critical race studies and what are the different examples and types of ways that people have carried out critical race work.
So like, is that like measuring like Facebook friends? What does that look like?
Measuring Facebook friends? What do you mean?
Like for critical race theory, quantitative.
Okay, so quantitatively, how would you study critical race theory, right? That's a great big question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. But I bring that point up to say that, like, if you're gonna look at it and you're gonna now do something different in terms of methodology, then you wanna raise that. Or let's say, and this happens a lot, like in thinking about doing critical research, right? I mentioned the McNair program and others like that in my office that all look at critical research and work. Oftentimes, a lot of the research has been done on whom? In this country, what do you think historically all the research participants who have participated in research and, oh, we know this about this and we know that about that and all the things that are in our textbook, who has that research been done by and who have been the participants in that research? Who would you say?
White males.
White males. Right? So you would raise that to be of concern, right? That, okay, these studies, like, so I was in psychology, I was a psych undergrad major, and, you know, it was about depression, loneliness, you know, clinical disorders. And if you look at their sample in their methods section, which, by the way, also, if you struggle with the methods section, look at your lit review, look at all the articles and the research, past studies that have been done, and look at their methods section and how they wrote it, right? You can see right there different examples of how you write a methods section. Sorry, side point. I just remembered. I was like, oh yeah, that's good. So keeping that in mind, you want to raise that. Like all the samples that, you know, have been examined previously have been with middle-aged, you know, white males and females, you know. For this study, you know, I really want to examine what depression looks like for African-American males. And so you would have brought in all the literature on depression, maybe everything that you could find that exists around mental health of African American males, and then you might show that there hasn't been as much. And then now, what you plan to do with your study and how you plan to do it, and why this is important. Does that help answer your question?
Yes. So even though that topic might be like, as you mentioned, it could be already out there, people might have already talked about it, there's many research about that, but something you want to do, you said find holes and like make something interesting, like, okay, this is still going on, I want to still brought that issue up, they didn't show this, or something that you want to do, have something.
Exactly. So I'll give you another example of that. I'm sorry, most of my examples are going to be in like psych and education because that's my background and field.
Too. Thank you.
So what do you think the literature says on parent involvement and student outcomes?
Income.
Outcomes.
Student outcomes, and parent involvement,
More involved, more higher grades.
right? More involved parents, higher grades. My roommate in grad school said, well, how do you define parent involvement? Right? So previous studies, they define it.
Maybe like being on a PTA board.
Exactly. They define it as, you know, the amount of time parents volunteer for classroom activities, volunteering for PTA involvement, how many times the parents talk to the teachers about how their child is doing, right? She said, well, for immigrant parents or for parents with language differences, their involvement in their child's education may look very, very different.
Very different.
So, for example, myself, my parents were not able to communicate with my teachers. They had no clue what the American education system looked like. But like most other Asian parents, they really value education still. And I would say they were very involved in my education. Right? But they wouldn't have been, quote unquote, by existing research, characterized as high in parental involvement because of the way that they defined it. And so therefore now, my roommate's research study was going to have alternative definitions of parental engagement. Compelling, right? So, see? Build that. What's up?
Thank you. That was
There's
a good
still
example.
something there, right?
Thank you. Yes.
And so no matter how much something has already been studied, there's still so much more that we don't know.
Okay.
And that's why each and every one of you should be really, really congratulating yourselves for being here and for like getting on that PhD route, because right, it's time to like write additional histories. It's time to continue to build that foundation of knowledge, not only by white males, right?
Should be everyone.
So all the knowledge that you have around the very research that you want to carry out needs to get conducted, needs to get published, needs to get out there. And you will find the right people who will put their money on you, on your projects, right? In terms of funding to get this work done.
Do you have any recommendations for us on how we can protect our research from being stolen or plagiarized?
Great question. It's a sad reality that I see even at the graduate school level, often, and also at the undergraduate level. But I would say that, you know, if you think about grad school and how it is, and you know, it's so competitive to even get to grad school. Well, when you're there, it's also very competitive and it's very individualistic. Meaning that, you know, you're supposed to carry out your own projects, right? So it's your ideas, it's about fostering just your ideas as a scholar, right? And it makes it seem very much like it's you versus the next person, or it's just you. It's all on you to come up with these great ideas for your dissertation or for what it is that you're gonna work on and produce out there, and what your research identity is gonna be, or what your research trajectory or mission or how it defines you, right, is going to be your whole career in the academy. So if you think about that aspect of it, it's extremely hard. I would say that you, right, need to, I know students who say, well, that's exactly why I put my head to the grind each and every day to get to that publication faster, because once it's published out there with my name, they have to give me credit where credit is due. But it is not something that is so, it's being done every day, right? There are great ideas or research that's been put out there that have been founded on your very experiences or lack thereof, or my experiences or lack thereof. And you don't see any of that being acknowledged, right? So there are alternative research methods that get at some of that. So now, you know, you can write community papers, where if you get, in education, we get youth who participate in, you know, active participatory research, YPAR youth. And so we put them on publications, we, you know, include them essentially in the development of the projects also from the beginning. So when you think about research questions and you read all this knowledge, well, they probably have that experiential knowledge to bring to the table too. And so I think the more that we can do that from a community standpoint, the better, but it's not a complete solution to the very thing that you're bringing up. Yeah, it's hard. I've seen people who want to make sure like your cohort mates are very trusting in grad programs and you all work together, and then the next thing you know, it's like, oh, they now are taking lead author on this, and you know, that was your idea. And you know, there you see it going, and you know.
So there's no way to, basically.
It's tough.
It's tough.
And I would say that the more representation we have, probably the better. And it's also systemic, right? We need to change the way we think about graduate education or scholarship being so individualized. And I would say in some fields, it's much more collaborative in nature than others. And so there's also that. Which is also dangerous though at the same time, because when things are collaborative, what becomes whose ideas and who gets credit for it, right? But at the same time, I do think that that ideological shift potentially can help in terms of it being more community-based as much as possible, right? But I will tell you that the very foundation of kind of research and scholarship is on the idea of like one person who came up with X ideas and gets it out there and published and writing it, and that's who gets credit for it. So, great question that I'm not sure I have an answer to.
Could we copyright it?
So when you publish your work, whatever contracting agency or publication that you're working with does get like, you know, you get the rights kind of copyrights.
That's not till it's
all
completed.
copyrighted. Yeah, it's not until it's completed and published. So I will say though, certain projects like your master's thesis or your dissertation, you do file those and you can choose to get those copyrighted. So even though it's not yet a publication, it is still a final product, right? And it's still housed in a Library of Congress, et cetera, and all those things. So you can access my dissertation, for example. And it's interesting because I, as a first-gen student and as the first in my family to go to college, let alone get any advanced degree, I knew nothing about that. I knew nothing about what it meant to trademark something, to copyright something, and all the things that, yes, there are processes for all of that. The librarians are a good help with that too. They put on entire workshops when you're filing like your dissertation or your thesis projects to let you know how to do that and what the university's rights and privileges are also to your work. Did you know that? So like as a student and you produce work, you know, let's say you come up with an idea or develop something here while you're a student at UCLA. Technically UCLA owns it or owns a part of it, you know, largely. So that happens with faculty too, like a lot of our science faculty who develop different ideas or in engineering develop actual technology, right? UCLA does get credit for that too.
Thank you.
And you get paid once it's copyrighted. So like, I got a check in the mail, and this is a funny story, I got a check in the mail, and I was like, what is this for? It's like, it wasn't much, but it was like, you know, $25, and I was like, I'm not expecting a refund or anything. So I look it up, and it says it's the royalties check from my dissertation. Some people had downloaded my dissertation and essentially bought it. So here was my cut of the royalties to my dissertation. And I was like, all right! $25, you know? But, you know, not having had, I think, book contracts or things, because I'm not in a field where we have that. You know, journal entry and submissions, like I'm co-authors on papers and things like that from obviously my time as an administrator and as my time as a student. Those you kind of are an author on, you read and you sign those documents when you submit for publication. And to be honest with you, like, you know, unless you have an attorney kind of reading those things, you're just like, all right, a publication, yes, sign. You know, here, it's been accepted, publish it, please, you know. You know, you're not sure really what you're signing your life away to, right? And so that's some of the things that I will caution you on too. There are also journals out there that will ask you to publish your work in their journals, and they're not real. Like, they're not peer-reviewed journals, meaning that they're ones that are like for profit only. And so they're not prestigious in nature, if you will. Prestigious is usually means that it's peer-reviewed, meaning that when you submit your work, your final research paper, it's a similar process to like the proposals. It gets 3 blind reviewers. You don't know your name, and that's something we do too. I want to make sure you all know that. Once we receive research proposals, we make sure to strip identifiers, your name, UID numbers, etc. Because we understand human nature, there's bias. And so we try our best to do that. So we don't have your names go out to the committee to review. Because what if you happen to know one of them, or what if your faculty advisor? And so also we do ask, like, is this your student? Please let us know if it is. You know, you can't be reading your own student's work, right, or reviewing it for us in that way. So we do ask that too. But where was I getting? So there's a peer review process, and so those journals and publishers tend to be more prestigious in nature in the academy, what we consider to be legit or valid journals. And there are money-making schemes out there that ask you to submit your work, and then the other rules and procedures out there is that once your work is published in one space, one journal, you cannot then publish it again, right? So if you thought this was a legit publication and you went ahead and submitted your work, you also kind of can't say, oh, just kidding, since I found out you're not prestigious, I'm gonna now take my work and also submit it here. So you also have to be very careful about that. Great questions. I'm not sure they were all about research proposals, but I'm happy to answer any and all questions. Any others? I wanna, before I forget, because my time has already been up, I think, is that I did bring with me, and in my office, I said that I have graduate students who work with students who come in and say, I need help, or I want to know what goes into a research statement, or I'm writing a research proposal. We also have a reference library. So I have a binder of sample research proposals across a variety of fields in here, or who've applied to different programs here on campus, that we've asked students if it's okay that we keep for other students to see, and they've said yes. So you see their names are also not on here. We've removed all those identifiers, but they have agreed to allow us to keep this reference in the office for folks who may come in and say, I just don't know what it looks like, or can I read through a couple? You're more than welcome to read through a couple. So I have this here at the break. I'm happy to stay a little longer if anyone wants to take a look at a few or a couple, whatever you may want. You can feel free to do so. I tell students in the office, you're not able to leave with the binder, but hey, if you get out your phone and you take a picture or two, I can't stop you. So. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. I think you had your hand for a question.
So for research questions, how do you suggest going about making a specific research question, but also keeping in mind that it will evolve with the process and it may kind of veer to another direction, and not being so stuck in maybe a couple of things like in research?
So I would say that actually all the pieces in your proposal could potentially be moving. So it's not just that your methods are going to change, but maybe your questions might change slightly too. But I think that I have colleagues who probably would argue that a well-defined research question should have been thought out before that even happened, so that you wouldn't necessarily have to make those changes to your question. But in practice, I know it doesn't work like that. Even with, my own dissertation, the questions that I set forth with from the proposal to the time that I ended, I certainly had more questions than I started with that I wanted to incorporate and answer, and that I did in the whole larger piece. But it wasn't that I changed scope completely where I needed to go back and change my specific questions, if you will. So I do want to make it very clear about that too, is they do kind of expect that if you're proposing those set of questions, they will expect you to answer those. Now, if you answer more than those or get more information and other things answered within that or related to that, that's on you. But that at least those would kind of be what, your intentions were, and they try to make sure that you honor that at the very least.
Can we also email you if we have any more questions?
Absolutely, yeah. So I have my contact information up here. Please feel free to email me if you're ever, here on campus. Otherwise, instead of the Saturdays, please feel free to come by my office. I'm in 1202. I have business cards as well today. If anyone wants it, that's fine too. And David certainly knows how to reach me too.
Okay. Do you have more of these after today? I just found out this morning. That's why we were late. That's why I was late. But do you have more of these after this year?
That's a great question. I think that's one for the organizer. So maybe David, the question was, are there more of these types of talks after this Saturday?
Oh, right. We're going to be hosting Saturday Academies. This is our final Saturday Academy for this academic year, but we're going to start hosting more Saturday Academies starting in September.
September, okay. Thank you.
So yeah, look for them in the fall. And then, I don't know if you can get access maybe to the previous ones that have already taken place this year.
Oh yeah, they're online.
Okay, great. All previous Saturday sessions, I think the presentations themselves are online, and they're clearly recorded, so they're online, so you can access
That's
them
helpful.
online.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you all again for having me.
Okay, so